Good morning, my dear friends. In today's presentation, I am going to talk about Oscar Wilde's exploration of the themes of love and marriage in the importance of being honest. Now, before I get into the textual nitty-gritties, I have to tell you something about the Victorian attitude that Wilde was a product of, but at the same time, Wilde was inveighing against. Now, so far as love and marriage are concerned, the Victorians displayed a kind of a prudish mentality, even though the population infused by leaps and bounds, even though the Victorian household, the typical Victorian household was teeming with children, even though love, lust, betrayal, and loyalty, these things were as common in the Victorian age, there was some kind of a cultural taboo against an open avowal of or discussion of private matters of this hue. Similarly, marriages were considered in a very grave manner, at least by the official perspective, from the official perspective, even though marriages were as much mercenary as they were determined by or directed by any romantic affection. You know, once again I have to tell you something about the Imperial Reality of Britain. The upper classes and the lower classes, because of the great deal of gap between the pecuniary circumstances of each, had held diametrically opposite views on such matters as love and marriage. Whereas the leisured class or classes were fed by the spoils of empires, the working men and women had to eke out a paltry existence somehow or the other. Now, so far as this text is concerned, in most cases, it is about love and marriage of the upper class of the society, Victorian society, I mean. You see, officially, there are 3 marriages that take place at the end of the play. And there are 3 pairs of lovers shown in the play. Obviously, the pairs are Cecily and Algernon Moncrief, Cecily Cardew and Algernon Moncrief. Then Gwendolyn and Jack Worthing, or to be precise, Earnest Moncrief. And last but not least, Miss Letitia Prism and Dr. Chasuble. Okay. But at the same time, there are allusions too and discussion of any other marriages. For example, you see, the marriages and prospective marriages, courtships and suits alluded to or hinted at by Lady Bracknell. There is a discussion between Lane and Algy in the first act of the play about misunderstanding that Lane allegedly had with a young person that led to their marriage. Similarly, the marriage, quite a mercenary marriage between Lady Bracknell and Lord Bracknell, is also alluded to by Lady Bracknell herself in a tongue-in-cheek manner, when she says that I didn't have anything, and meaning money, and Lord Bracknell was quite wealthy, but I didn't allow, that is, Lady Bracknell didn't allow that consideration to come between her and a marriage with the peer, Lord Bracknell. So, you can very easily understand that her motive in marrying this ineffectual member of the British aristocracy, who, according to Gwen, was not known much beyond the family circles, and which, by the way, Gwendolyn thought to be the proper sphere of man. So, that the marriage between Lady Bracknell and Lord Bracknell was driven by the mercenary ambitions of the lady is very clearly brought out by Oscar Wilde. Now, after setting the stage as it were, I should now discuss the themes of love and marriage separately. See, so far as love is concerned, romantic love, a kind of a love at first sight or unreasoning affection between the sexes, is frowned at by Wilde. You have to understand two things. Number one, Wilde was too cynical and too worldly wise to entertain any kind of mistaken ideal about what we often mistakenly call undying affection. Similarly, you have to understand another thing, even though that is not properly hinted at in this text, as it is done in a text such as The Picture of Dorian Gray. In this text, we do not get any hint at least overtly, any hint at homosexuality. Right. But Wilde, being a man with homosexual propensities, was supposed to look askance at the so-called compulsory heterosexual affection between obviously people from different sexes for each other that we commonly call love. See, in the case of let us deal with the love between the least important pair in this context, that is Miss Prism and Canon Chasuble first. You see, in their case, it is a kind of a marriage of convenience because each have left behind the salad days of their youth. They are middle-aged or elderly even. So each is the best bet that the other can find. So in this, there is some kind of an attachment that grows up between the two, and it leads to a marriage, or at least it should lead to a marriage if we have to accept the textual vision of the pair at the end. Okay, so far as the relationship between Jack and Gwendolyn, obviously I have to point out time and again that Jack ultimately turns out to be Earnest Moncrief. The relationship between Jack and Gwendolyn is a very queer one in some ways, because on one hand there is deception. Jack has been deceiving Gwendolyn with a false name and false identity, that of Earnest. Because clearly enough, Gwendolyn has always, or at least she thinks she has always, entertained some kind of a peculiar fascination, a fondness for this name, Earnest. In the case of Gwendolyn, things are not that casual as it seems. Gwendolyn is reasonably worldly wise. You can understand this. Even though her childish insistence about a proper proposal for marriage is quite idiotic, to say the least, and her equally well-meaning, even though stupidly conceived, affection for Jack, even after the latter has been rejected by her mother, Lady Bracknell, is, if we don't know the text till the end beforehand, at least a bit dangerous, and could have landed her in very hot water. So far as the relationship between Algy and Cecily is concerned, again, there is deception from one end, that is obviously Algy is imposing upon the credulous nature of Cecily, the unspoiled, quote-unquote unspoiled country girl, who has fallen in love, almost head over heels, in love with Uncle Jack's wicked younger brother, the imaginary Earnest. Now, as I have discussed in my presentation of the role and significance of the scripts in the importance of being honest, the record that Cecily keeps of their alleged or imaginary engagement leaves us almost baffled. We really are at a loss to think how an educated, cultured girl could only fall in love with an elusive name. But, ultimately it so happens that at least from the side of Cecily, the attachment seems rather genuine. Now, in both cases, the love affair that the girls entertain for, the love interest that the girls entertain for the man or men with the names of Earnest, is very curious. However, at the same time, we have to understand another thing, that at least from the point of view of the boys, that is Jack and Algie, it is rather nefarious, because both are imposing upon their respective beloveds. In the case of LG, for example, it is basically a flirtation of a kind, you know. He has often visited the countryside, presumably for pleasure and maybe even for flirtation. So when he comes to Jack's place, it is to look at little Cecily and find out what kind of a person she really is. Ultimately, however, and this is a very peculiar kind of a make-believe world that Wilde is creating for us. The evil is powerless, the bad is powerless, the deceivers are powerless to cause any real harm, and they are won over. Ultimately, at least, both LG and Jack, obviously, LG to a lesser extent, are hell-bent on marrying the girls. They are at least not there to ruin these girls and to make them fallen women. They are not like that. So, even though Wilde is inveighing against romantic love and its peculiar, childlike, puerile attitudes and beliefs, at least love affairs that ultimately spring up in these plays seem to be genuine, which is why both the boys think of rechristening themselves as Earnest, because two stubborn girls have fallen in love with the name. But at the same time, we have to understand one thing, and that is why feminist critics have had much to say about this play. You know, the passion that they feel have no depth. It is as facile, as keen-deep as the society itself, whose product they are, whose products they are. The society is superficial, supercilious, skin-deep. Just like the society earlier in the Restoration age. And that is why Oscar Wilde's play has often been called some kind of a modern day comedy of manners as well. Now, so far as marriages are concerned, you know, we have to understand in both cases, Lady Bracknell seems to play almost a judicial role. In the case of Jack's courtship for her daughter, Gwen, obviously she tries to get the best bargain for her daughter, thinking not much about the mutual affection that has found between the two young persons. She actually judges Jack just as somebody would judge a shuttle in a market or something before buying something. Okay. So far as Um, the monetary aspect of this match is concerned, she is reasonably well satisfied after learning from Jack about his financial condition. But so far as the family background of Jack is concerned, its uncertainty, its dubiousness, its apparent shadiness leaves her utterly bewildered. That is why, in a very, very wild-like way, she says that to lose one parent may be very sad, but to lose both parents smacks of utter carelessness. And this is really, really a nonsensical dialogue, but quite behooves the kind of person that Lady Bracknell is. Similarly, she demands that before the season is out, Jack should, in order to marry Gwendolyn, produce at least one parent of either sex. Now, if we think about the marriage between LG and Cecily, Jack's word is concerned, she quizzes and cross-examines Jack regarding Cecily's financial condition, quite in a becoming severe way. At the same time, she drops very subtle and apparently careless hints about the financial condition of LG. For example, she says that LG has nothing but his debt to fall back upon, and that LG is almost broke, utterly bankrupt. He is pointed out by his aunt. But at the same time, she is quite eager for his entrapped nephew to marry a rich heiress like Sissy. So in all cases, we can very easily ascertain that financial consideration, the consideration of safety, reigns supreme. Just as, you remember, if you have read Pride and Prejudice, Charlotte Lucas's case, when she was forced to marry Mr. Collins, the odious person, because she was not very, very lovely to look at. She was getting on in years, so she had to grab any husband respectable enough and financially solvent enough to keep her out of want. So here also, the mercenary aspect of the marriages is quite forcibly foregrounded by Oscar Wilde in many cases. So from this discussion, you may understand the way Oscar Wilde has dealt with the themes of, or explored and exploded the themes of love and marriage as they are thought of